Well, welcome back to the ITAM kitchen, the place where we actually have these candid conversations to figure out, okay, how do we do stuff? How do we go that next step? How do we help collaborate, right? It's kind of like that party you go to where everyone gathers around the kitchen. We always gather in the kitchen. It's where the discussions always happen, right? But it's being able to say, how do we look at this differently? Move that forward. My name is Bill, Mr. Bill. I'm a recovering IT practitioner. Here, one of the founders here for the ITAM kitchen, as well as we have and this is all based upon some dialogue. What I found was a lot of the industry struggling, right? I saw something the other day said, well, let AI do it all for you. There's about ITAM. I just posted, if you didn't see it today, I put a little very post on it. It's like, man, let AI do it. Whether it's trading, whether it's your that part, I'll be around to help with the cleanup. So, just being honest, right? You've got to think about it. You've got to be thinking strategically how you move this forward, because what I'm finding is a lot of people just don't know. They don't know what they don't know, and we have a lot of uncertainty here. We've got to be the rock. We've got to be the rock with what we do. That's the whole idea here. Provide that reality. I provide a little bit of that reality check, and I have two colleagues here, partners in crime, who've been with me for a while here in the ITAM kitchen. I'll let them introduce themselves, and we'll come back around and jump right into our topic for this week, because we're going to have a lot of fun. That's what it's all about. Deanna, you want to kick it off?
Sure. I'm Deanna Hennigar, former trainer. I got myself out of training, moved into management, went into ITSM for a while, and now I'm in ITAM and never looked back.
I'm Rob Collins, 30 plus years of experience between my time in the United States Marines and then all the way through 2 different state agencies and some private sector consulting, all around IT asset management. I've developed programs. I've been able to produce metrics, dashboarding, and reporting on a couple of different platforms, all related to that. And I'm bringing my experience to these scenarios.
Exactly. And between 30 years of experience for each one of us, it adds up quickly, right? And it's being able to look at that. And that's what we want to be able to help you, that information. How can we further extend this? Because again, this was a beta test. This whole ITAM kitchen approach started on January 7th. And we've been going strong ever since. We're now down to 3 days a week versus 5 days a week, which has helped on several different fronts. But it's being able to make sure we also are aligned. We're aligned with our community, the needs, moving that next step forward. And that's why you're here, you're watching right now, whether you're live. If you're live, definitely go put your name in the chat. Say where you're from, what you're doing, how you're focused on that, right? If it's after the fact, still put your name in the chat and say, yes, I'm from here now, really, and put your comments about it. Maybe you saw something that's like, okay, I need to add and contribute. Put it within the comments. So we are paying attention to this. Absolutely. Because right now, each week, what we're doing right now with the ITAM kitchen is we're doing what we call the inherited, easy for me to say, right? Playbook, environment playbook. Because when we get new jobs, how do we do the job? How do we do that next step? What type of scenarios do we run into? That's what this is all about. And we have we do 3 different sections on it. And first, we start on triaging on Monday, kind of introduce that topic and triage, okay, how are we going to look at it, which we just did this last Monday. Wednesdays, we actually talk about stabilization. How are we going to stabilize what is happening to provide those next steps? And Friday is about the 30, 60, 90-day plan. What do we plan on doing today in the upcoming days, as well as the upcoming months, for that next step? And now it's the whole idea behind this is let seasoned practitioners talk through this. Because what I'm finding is the seasoned as well as unseasoned, the seasoned practitioners love things like this. We love things we just enjoy. Okay, give us a little challenge. We're going to figure it out. That's what we do. That's how we think. I also find out the new practitioners and consultants, it's like, I don't know, I'm going to leave it for somebody else, which is the wrong attitude. I'll be brutally honest, I'm going to call you out. But you have to figure, okay, but it gives you some insights to say, here's how we're thinking. Maybe you have a little different spin on it. That's great. Let's figure out how to move that forward. And our topic this week is about CIO modernization without an inventory inside of a hospital. On Monday, we talked about all sorts of different topics as far as, okay, are we talking about Are we doing IT? Are we talking about inside the clinics and hospitals? We talk about the different types of equipment. We talked about a whole slew of things. Actually, I put it this way. I summarized the meeting for Monday, and I have 6 pages. That's how much you talked about. So if you didn't see Monday's session, go back and see it. It's absolutely out there because a lot of great information shared. And this is us just collaborating. In the chat, again, if you're here looking at live, please put it out. We're actually always live on 10 a.m. Eastern on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And we do that on purpose because we're consistently there. So when we think about stabilization, let's just dig into this, right? On Monday, we talked about we have an environment, hospital environment. Sometimes we have equipment everywhere. We have to think about OT, IT, sometimes IoT, depending on what the network is. Sometimes different types of equipment, whether it's network, PCs. We have parts sitting on floors. It's going to be that type of environment, right? How do we discover it? How do we go through different facilities and go through that part, right? Also being able to say, okay, what's the importance? Because we're going to do a plug-in here. We're doing a whole entire refresh. And sometimes we have to get the what's good enough approach to say, okay, we may not have an exact inventory because we don't have it. Okay, rule of thumb, let's start talking to people, start talking with stakeholders. And that's some of the topic we talked about on Monday. Because at least then we have some insights to say that next step. It also provides that awareness to help us go that, to help the dialogue and understand some of the requirements. Because again, we're trying to do this all at once. We have very little effort because we've been told go do the job. It's not about outsourcing it. Maybe that's not an option in the future, but it's being able to say you were hired for the role, perform it, right? Mm-hmm. So when we think about this in stabilization, how do we start working on the stabilization and going that next step? What comes to mind for this specific scenario on stabilization? Any thoughts there? Deanna, Rob, whoever wants to start.
Yeah, I'll start. There's a few of them that kind of stand out to me. And like the first thing, right, is to establish that need for an inventory that you're not going to make progress. This isn't going to go well unless you put some form of inventory process in place. And this is a non-negotiable.
Yep.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, Deanna, go ahead.
Sure. We also want to make sure that we're not interfering with their day-to-day job. They are not computer people, and we are not surgeons or doctors. But we need to keep them viable and not interrupt their workflow.
The next one for me that stands out is you want to identify and engage with the key stakeholders early. Get those conversations and relationships started as soon as possible, because in order to move forward with the plan, you're going to need to assess what their needs are to ensure that they're being met. To Deanna's point, you don't want any of them on the clinical side of the house to be bothered one bit by this if you can help it.
And that's what makes communication and governance imperative. We need to communicate to them what we're doing and why we're doing it, while trying not to interrupt their flow. If they don't have their inventory done correctly, they don't know their hardware or software, so then we need to put some agreed upon governance around so that we can capture that information.
There's another one to that point that follows on with that, and that is you need to get a full list of the business units, right, within that organization, so that this way you can identify the business criticality of the hospital and the management, right, in order to immediately find those areas to add that value. This is where what we're doing is going to add value.
Absolutely. And it's being able to make sure, to your point, realize some of those users out there, when it comes to what we're looking at for asset management, they honestly don't care.
Right.
Mm-hmm. They shouldn't, right? They need to be aware, but again, it's aware, but not care. They're not going to. They're going to say, "So I have a life and death situation, right? I need to make sure that these devices, you're not impacting me, helping keep a patient alive,
Right.
as an example, because it literally is life and death. And we have to keep that mindset, because we have to work with our stakeholders, our constituents on that side, because this is literally life. It could be life and death situation. It's the scenario, not to be dramatic, but it's just reality, right? And we've got to respect that part, because we may have to meet after hours. We might have to separate conversations. We may not be able to meet with the individuals we need to, because we need to meet with other stakeholders and have that flexibility. That's also key.
Yep. Sometimes senior leadership, executive board members, they're on the clinical side and not necessarily on the IT side. So they may not understand what our need for doing this is to begin with. They know that we as computer people need to do something, but they don't seem to may not know why it's so important, and that's what we need to get to them.
Exactly. And that's a good point.
To that point, and from experience, very early in the engagement is when you want to start those communication paths. Very early, between you and the executive sponsor, come up with what's happening, who may be involved, and then initial communication, so that there are no surprises on their end. This way, they're all informed. Hey, this is the effort that's happening. These are the people that will reach out to you, and then this is going to be sort of our way forward. So don't be surprised if you have any questions. By all means, come back to your internal executive sponsor to clarify everything. Putting other mechanisms in place too around that. Any non-disclosure agreements, etc., all that stuff up at the front end.
What I would also say with the establishment importance, let's build upon that a little bit, right? I also think it's like help to identify what the importance is. Mm-hmm. Again, we talked about, okay, you minimize their downtime. Be honest with that. Oh, yeah. Be upfront with it. Reinforce that. If something happens, please give me a heads up, because that was not the intention. It happens, right? Things are going to happen, but it's also a human aspect when you have that human part. Also establish here what the pains are that you're trying to solve, right? Because there may be pains that the doctors and nurses and some of the IT folks may not be aware of. And it's about that collaboration. So make sure you help establish that, because that check and balance, don't just make assumptions they know, right? That's where the stabilization comes into play, because you're actually communicating on it. I'm talking about on the same page.
Also,
go for it.
I was going to say, also with importance, we want to know, do you have something that's really working well?
Yeah.
Okay. Because we have a tendency to wonder what's wrong and a good job. It helps gain us our credibility.
Yeah, good point. Absolutely. Because you might also find out from this, when you start talking about stabilization, we talked about this a little bit of the discovery from the triage, right? The equipment. You start talking about the equipment, because these individuals are going to understand that equipment, and you're going to find out, okay, what type of equipment we're at, validating the type of equipment we're working with, right? Whether it's outdated equipment, new equipment, whether it's air gapped, whether it's on the network, you're going to understand some of those nuances, because you might have a laser. It could be something, I know I'm used to a laser device from 10 plus years ago that's been out there, but it's not going to run on today's operating system, because just how the software was developed, right? But it cannot go down. It's critical, right? It's very critical. It cannot go down. It's microscopic, et cetera. It goes down the esophagus and helps cut lasers and all sorts of things, right? It helps. Literally, this is stuff that cuts skin and muscle, et cetera. It's like, well, that's kind of gruesome. No, this is true, right? Been there, done it. I get it. Actually, on the other as a patient. So this stuff, these different pieces is critical. Listen to my grammar. They're all critical as we move forward. But as we put this through this, right, we're talking about some of the users. Where do we put ourselves in the management layer with stabilization? How do we provide that confidence? Because I think that's another part we need to make sure we're establishing for and further reinforcing. What comes to mind from an executive layer or sponsorship layer? that we need to make sure we provide that level of confidence that we are progressing. They need their help. What comes to mind?
Yeah, impart some formal project management, right? And get those and timely status updates so that you can start to show or demonstrate that value from the effort. Those two things right there are like tip top for me.
Sure, makes sense. Absolutely.
We would also need to understand what the business units on and how to prioritize. We know the computers, but we don't necessarily know everything in the ER,
Yeah.
surgery, ICU, even ambulance, whatever. When you come in the ambulance,
Ambulances, yeah.
we need to understand what their pain points in their own environment so that we can make sure we're not stepping on them with our environment.
True.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as IT folks, technology folks, right? ITAM's a little bit different hybrid, but with IT folks, typically we only think about IT devices, what we're doing day in, day out, right? In this case, it's not just about understanding IT. We need to understand the true business. And what comes out of this, if anybody's done this, right, or worked with this, you learn, it allows you to evolve your skills, communication, the relatability, how your alignment is. You understand the human aspect behind what our skills really are, what we can provide, value you can provide to the entire discipline.
That's where that business alignment activity or exercise comes into play to understand those needs. And it's pretty simple. It's across 3 tiers, if you will. The core, let's say, function and goal of the business, how IT supports that, and how ITAM supports IT. That's something I can't emphasize enough.
Yeah. Extremely critical at this point. We're doing stabilization because when we look at this, we're also providing that ability to say, how progression, right? That's some of the timely updates, the project management. Progression, how are we progressing, right? Deanna, you had something there.
I was going to say that triage means something different to us than it does to them.
That's a good point. Yes, very much so. That's a very good point. A very good point. Because when a stabilization is also being able to say, where do we start? Right?
Yeah.
We have a 30, 69-day plan. We'll make that happen. But this is actually kind of even prior to that, right? Is we also need to start understanding collecting things, don't we? We need to collect, talk about some of the business needs and pains. But what about schedules, upcoming events, holidays? Maybe there's a major event about to happen. Maybe it's a hospital, right? Maybe there's a specific activity happening for a new technology or a new celebration of something happening at the hospital, right? You can't touch that.
That's why you put that PM in place, somebody that understands that nature of those kinds of things and the impact to project plans and resourcing. So that's one of the roles that they're going to have for helping to formulate that plan.
Absolutely. Now, what also comes to mind, because we have a modernization activity, right? That's what this is all about.
Yeah.
Sometimes I find, we mentioned this a little bit ago, so sometimes your technology can be outdated. And what I mean by that, it's not on the wire, it can be old Windows type environments, not up to date, they were recently patched, et cetera. But I think it's also important at this point for the requirements, et cetera, is understand, okay, when we say modernization, what's that really mean? Just clarity of that. And ask that from the business as well as from the executives, right? Because if they're using equipment that are antiquated, et cetera, but it's good enough, and they're trying to look at budget, that's a much different discussion than the other side.
Also, the other thing we have are emergency events, unseen emergency events. And I lived through 9/11 on the Isle of Manhattan, so that was an unseen event.
Unforeseen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unforeseen unforeseen events, yeah. Because all of a sudden their life changes.
Now it goes also back to timeliness, right? And maybe this is a opportunity where for the hospital, they've been trying to get funding for a long time. They've been struggling. They're working with technology 10 plus years old, right? 10 to 15 years old. And they just got a windfall that came a large donation from somebody else. And they're trying to spend money in a specific within a certain time frame. So you've got that again, the timeliness from a whole different angles. Things we really from asset management we're not usually used to, right? But also you have that whole influx of equipment coming in. Not just for one wing, maybe it's for like an entire building. Sometimes you have these billions of dollars given to the hospital, right? I'm going to build this entire wing. Well, that wing could mean not just a building. It can mean equipment. It can mean, okay, a whole new technology, a whole new group, a new being built within the hospital. You've got to understand some of those dynamics as well. And so let me also provide that clarity. And again, that goes back to the schedule. Hospitals, they're all across the board. Well, not, you may say, oh, Bill, but all businesses are like that. Exactly. That's exactly the point, right? We got to think about it, but we typically don't think like this. It's just when we put it in perspective and we think about the human nature, hospitals are a great example. Then it's like, oh, well, that makes sense. Well, that's the whole idea, right? How you put that. Is there any more you want to add to that? Because that was just something that came to mind for me, being a patient, because that's very relative on several fronts.
What if it's say multiple networks or environments, such as it's a city-owned hospital, and they still have to follow. They can't just follow what they want to do. They have to follow what the city is willing to let them do.
Approvals or change. No, that's a great point. That's a great point, actually, because this can drive some of your budget. You may have that windfall, the donation we just talked about, but until the governing council, committee, whoever it is, maybe it's even the commissioners of the county, until they approve that, nothing happens.
And they're more focused on the hospital equipment, not necessarily IT.
Well, they're focused on that, but they may be also focused on the political aspects behind this too, right?
Yeah.
And there's things outside your control. It's like, but I hate this. I get it. Trust me, I'm not a government guy. Because of this, it's like sometimes I'll just say the politics and somebody's, I wouldn't even say rubbing elbows, but it's like, okay, they want to make a statement to avoid something happening, or they're waiting for someone else to retire. You find out it's like, really? I just want to get this done. That's our task. So we can work on other worlds, other activities. When I say worlds, but with those approvals, just realize some things are outside of our control. And you've got to be able to. I wouldn't use the word succumb to that, but more about be aware of that. Again, I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just trying to say, here's the reality. I'm trying to get a reality check when we talk about this.
Well, you're going to have to negotiate with it too. And so I think that there is an additional point there that could be made, and that is around getting cooperation and working with financial management, because they are going to be able to illustrate the value, right, that you can get, the actual like hard savings, so and those kinds of things, actual cost reductions, etc. For you to do this, it is a modernization effort, and the technology is fairly expensive. So you need the help from them to illustrate, all right, this is the benefit if you make this, if you apply this piece of budget to this effort, what you can expect to come. And once you have those return on investment conversations, then getting approvals will probably be quite a bit easier.
I would say flexibility. We have to change as changes change.
Yeah.
and still focus on why we're there.
Yeah, let's go back to the budget part, because something else came to mind for me. I was taught by this by the government a while back. Is if you get approval for a budget, once you get approval, savings may not be of interest. As much as we look at savings all the time, okay, how much savings can we provide, et cetera, savings may not be of interest to them. It's like, really? It's like, no, they're interested in spending the budget. Right? If you don't spend it, you lose it.
Right.
So that's literally how the government works, right? So just make sure you keep it in check and balance on that. It's easy to get caught up. We're going to talk about savings. On the other side, it may not be of interest to anybody but you. Could you realize that? And that's just a check and balance. It's like, why is that the case? These are things you got to work through with some of your other administrators and peers on some of that.
The savings may not.
Maybe you can provide some insight on that, because you're very government focused.
Yeah, in my experience, for instance, regardless of whether it's savings is the objective or just usage of the budget that's the objective, there must be some expression or some understanding or analysis on the value that it can bring, right? Because you can just spend it just to spend it. So great, and you just make sure you have that same amount next year minus whatever legislative mandate is out there to cut your 5% or whatever. Those are very typical within government. But if you can provide something on value that's returned from that investment, then you not only have that you've met your budget goal, and you'll get that next year, minus 5%, but you'll also have some other value that you're going to return to the organization. Let's say that value comes in the form, for instance, of more accurate diagnoses. And that's not your profession, but if you hear from them, like these stakeholders, the clinical side, that would be a value. It's like, great, well, maybe let's work on this piece, and let's see how we bring that to fruition for you. And then politically, they can broadcast that as a win.
Some of the clinical information, if our compute is working better, they could get their answers faster as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, to your point, read value facts, quicker answers.
That's a factor in life saving.
What also comes to mind when you start talking about budgets, when you start going down this path, because we also say we don't have enough resources, right? We don't have enough team members, et cetera. That's also the opportunity to say, raise your hand. It's like, we're putting all this in. We don't have a staff support. We need to think about adding adding 2 resources. And some of the technology we use today, when you implement tools like ServiceNow, et cetera, there's a whole slew. It's not about just installing a product, right? It's a platform and a team to be able to support that.
Mm-hmm.
You start thinking about that. The value is back to be value focused. Well, it's like, we're going to implement this. It's going nowhere because we don't have the staff support it, right? And you want to think about that. Again, it's not negative. It's just more about being insightful, because that's what you're being brought into the role for, is being able to say, okay, how can we work through this?
Mm-hmm.
Some great points here. And when we start talking about, because we was trying to look at the cyber risk, et cetera. So we see the value, and no one wants the information. We hear it all the time. Actually, I was just talking to a friend the other day, and she said to her system, the hospital was compromised by ransomware for 3 weeks, down the entire hospital. They couldn't use it, right? This is reality. This is not jump change, not things being made up. This is reality. This is what's happening today. It has been happening for years. And you're just not hearing the outside world because nobody wants to disclose this for good reason, right? They don't want to have that risk. But at the same time, how are we working to help avoid and eliminate that risk? Because that's what we're talking about. Just to provide some additional clarity on our scenario here. So I just want to put that little nugget in there. because some people can say, well, this just is never going to happen. It's like, it's already happened. Right?
Another consideration may be how long it's going to take to implement.
Absolutely.
I've been to some places where, no, you're giving that to me too quickly. Or how come it's going to take so long?
Yeah.
That's also a people issue.
Where would it fit? Where would each of those components fit in the 30, 60, 90-day window? And then what doesn't fit in there and would be part of an extension of the project beyond the current scope.
Well, so also let's think about from a quick win perspective, right? What is a quick low-hanging fruit in this scenario as we see it right now that can help us determine how we can easily assess or even help determine what those next steps are for a 30, 60, 90-day set of activities, the plan that's coming up that we're going to talk about on Friday. What comes to mind that we need to focus on here?
The capability that you didn't have before this project. Like, for instance, the whole thing around the inventories. Right? The end of this and some quick wins would be now you actually have visibility into what you have out there. With visibility and alignment and reporting, let's say, and recording from purpose activity is critical. You need to know what you have. You need to know what you're buying. And for me, that becomes a quick win.
Well, to your point, that single pane of glass is extremely critical, right? Definitely. Now, keep in mind, on Monday, we talked about purchasing records, vendor records are everywhere, right? We've got financial systems. We have no connection here. So what's also some additional quick wins leveraging, for say, from even an integration perspective that we could say, okay, here's where we could start.
We may be able to have a better knowledge on what our equipment is and our software spend. Because if that's one of the areas we don't have is our inventory, if we have the ability to find extra, put the inventory together quickly, they will be able to understand where they stand within their software and their hardware. Because that's one of the problems we have is we don't have an inventory. So inventory is not necessarily a fast, but if we hit different departments where we know that they have a lot of IT inventory, we can get them better aligned.
Good point. And you also have some tools out there, right, as well as those inventory tools as well, right? So be able to say, okay, let's do a snapshot. At least you have that, I'll say, the finger in the air. You're able to have a little bit more clarity on that for stabilization. Mm-hmm. It also helps that validation because you're going to be talking with stakeholders, right? It's that validation, and go back to those stakeholders. Say, I know you said that, and I'm not trying to debate you, but here's the status. Here's what I see on that type of equipment. Just so you're aware, let's see if we can have another 15, 30-minute discussion for clarity, because I don't understand why we have a gap. Why the delta's there.
We could be closing a risk issue because of the like doing more of the updating, patch Tuesdays. We'd be able to explain to them why this particular set of computers needs to be patched on a regular basis because of things that have happened out in the field. Lowers their cyber security risk.
No, it's a great point. Great point. Inventory side. Well, it's also where, to your point, equipment in different locations, right?
And ownership, if you can do that, yeah, that's a big deal in most places.
Well, you may also understand when you start having these stakeholder discussions, you start talking with some of the clinics, again, with the hospital network, right? You might also understand saying, well, we have an entire closet full of equipment. You
Why
also,
are you keeping it in a closet?
Usually under their desk too.
Yeah.
Nice pile like the footrest.
Space by space walkthroughs is really, if you
Yeah.
are capable of doing it, that's a great way
Yeah.
to find stuff that's been missing.
well, it helps you that high level estimation, right?
Mhm.
That's all we're trying to do. We're not trying to get exactness yet. we're getting there. And actually, that's a good point. We need to make sure from an awareness perspective, we're trying to do finger in the air. We're not trying to get clarity. If we can, that's great. But the goal is to just have something good enough. And sometimes the asset management folks, we actually get an analysis paralysis in there. Wouldn't you guys agree? It's easy for to say, I need to have everything immediately. Well, the immediately part, sure, great,
That's true.
but sometimes good enough helps you move forward.
Well, scope management is really important around that. There's the stuff that you want to do and need to do, right? And then there's the stuff you'd like to do, right? You can identify those things, and just in strategies to deal with scope creep in other facets of IT management in the past, it's always sort of been like my philosophy and my strategy for that is take in all the requests, but limit what you're going to work on today to within scope. And then everything else that's obviously out of scope or not so obviously out of scope, oh, that's great. We'll incorporate that in the next phase.
Yeah.
We'll see if we get some approval to take your requests that you're giving me now that are out of scope into consideration.
Mm-hmm. And realize that every stakeholder is going to have a completely different view of this. It's like, well, Bill, we're used to this. It's what we deal with all the time inside of environments, right? Again, how a clinic deals with equipment is going to be different than a hospital or the business, different units within the hospital. You have the different department heads. You've got the different dynamics on several different fronts. Maybe there's a hospital administrator that's like, yeah, you're not touching that. It's just not going to happen, right? Because we're not going to change. The build out's not happening for another 2 years, and at that point, we're going to change all the equipment. Not today. I know what the executive said, but they're going to have to wait it off. I'm more than happy to talk to them. You just never know what's going to be. Write down that risk.
Yeah.
Right.
One of the things I thought about from one of the other companies I worked for, the equipment interference, so electronic
That's good.
interference. When they first created those doors that open up automatically, they were done with magnets, and as you walk through it, degauss all your data. And so they had to go through more to manual, not manual, but more couldn't use magnets to open the doors.
Well, doesn't that also go by some of the standards you can use within the hospital, right? That's your architect. I'll say that. Isn't that your architectural committee that's going to be helping drive that?
There are building standards and specification standards to the way most of this equipment is done. Because I've worked very closely with like electronic engineering standards and like FCC standards for communication, going all the way back to my time in the Marines. Those things are built. They don't even get built unless they meet certain criteria. And so those are typically discovered this way. This doesn't mean that something doesn't slip, because we did have a conference once upon a time that I was supporting, and their people had cell phones in the room that didn't make too much of a problem, except that there was one particular model of cell phone which is sitting very close to where all of the communications coming in and out of that conference room were, and it was imparting a terrible noise. And I literally had to ask the people close by, hey, can you just show me your cell phone? And once I did, I found the culprit. I said, okay, give me a second, just turn it off, just for a minute, right? And the moment that they turned it off, of course, the noise went away. It's like, okay, that's it. During this, you're going to have to not use your cell phone. And that was it. But if it hadn't been for that education, for that training and that experience beforehand, yeah, this would have been an unsolvable IT problem. They would have just figured, oh, there's obviously something wrong with the room.
That's a great point. Is you do have to keep an open mind with some of these scenarios, right? You're going to run the scenarios you may have never realized you ran into before, and be objective. Be objective. Expect the unexpected, right? That creativity. If you have a creative mind, it's like, well, what ifs? And those what if scenarios. And I'm not even talking about negatives. How to fix it. That definitely helps in scenarios like what Rob just talked about, right? That's huge. Right?
Take that wet spaghetti and toss it to the wall. Is it sticking, or does it bounce off? Okay, here's the ITAM kitchen reference of the day.
Yeah, exactly. Because when you start thinking about the cybersecurity, again, we're thinking about from the cybersecurity, change out the equipment, and just bring everyone to kind of the core, right? We're talking about the CIO's made a mandate. We're going to do a modernization of IT equipment, right? IT modernization, and they've assigned us asset management as asset management leaders to actually address this. He says, "I'm hiring you for a reason. I don't have time for it. I need you to do it. Keep all my stakeholders, all my first lieutenants informed. I need you to resolve it and make this happen, so we can make this happen with whatever that time frame is, right? Say it's 1 year." Okay, needs 1 year, next 2 years. You say, I just started. I need this to be done. I need somebody confident, make it happen. Great, you signed up for you signed up for this, and now we're talking about the stabilization effort on our day 2 of our of this scenario to say, okay, how can we stabilize the environment so we understand what's there to help us with that 30, 60, 90-day plan. Now, some of the other parts, I know we talked about. This goes back to the alignment. We talked about that a little bit. It's also making sure from a governance perspective that we understand what regulatory agencies we're working with. That's also important. We talk about stabilization too, because that could be a hairy situation, right? Very hairy, as well as help us from a discovery of our stabilization. It's like, okay, you need to do this immediately, or it needs to be within a certain time frame. It happens all the time, right? So if you look at some of the regulations there are when it comes to Medicare, et cetera, at least within the U.S., it's probably true in other countries as well. You have those regulatory constraints already there. You need to make sure you're aligned within those constraints in addition to everything else we're talking about.
Yeah.
Now, also realize people don't like to change. Right? People don't like change, and you're inducing change. And from that means also from the tools that are being in place already, they might be outdated, that's great, but you have to figure out how to make it good enough or figure out how to influence them to actually induce a change as far as for you to help entice them, let's say entice them for that level of change. Because I know in this environment, we said, okay, has SCCM type tooling in place, only partially implemented. So it's one of those, okay, it can be haphazard, got it, right? Some legacy operating systems, et cetera. And you as an SME in this case, you will say, okay, I know this is where we are. That's great. Here's where we need to be, and provide that direction and help further communicate throughout the entire process. That's kind of where I was heading on that. That communication is also communication. Because you're being brought in to be a collaborator. I'll say it. And you've got to be a collaborator. You cannot, if you're a backroom operation type of guy, you may have just hired for the wrong one, right? And I say that being respectful. And if you want to accept the challenge and be a better communicator, entice, make it happen. Absolutely. If you're not, it's like, just be honest. Say, I'm not the right guy for the role. And say that up front. Again, it's not negative, just being honest, because here's what I'm saying in industry-wise. I see technical folks being brought into asset management roles. They're not equipped. They're not prepared for the scenarios, not prepared for the mindset, and they're being fired from the role. And it's actually hurting from an industry perspective, because at that point, the individuals that hire them, it's like, these asset management folks don't know what they're doing. That's a problem, right?
That would think of mergers and acquisitions, because then you end up with multiple help desks, multiple technicians who may not know how to work on all the equipment, and the downtime may be longer because you can't find the right person who knows how to resolve that piece of equipment.
Add divestitures to that point as well. If part of their costs are cutting measures, they decide they're going to eliminate a department or a business unit, then you have divestiture activity there, and that's all handled at the IT asset management level and finance and the executive management.
And hopefully everyone, as everyone's hearing right now, right? These are scenarios we run into the typical corporate environment.
Mhm.
We're just a little bit more highlight and sensitive because we have a different type of environment where we're literally saying, okay, we need to pay attention to this differently. There's just something about saying you're going to a hospital or medical institutions, you have a little bit more awareness. The reality is it's similar, just there's a different conversation.
Yeah, most definitely. Less room for error.
Mm-hmm. So what else can we add into this as we continue on our dialogue? 'Cause we're doing really well.
Mhm.
What if they're also not only a hospital, but they're a teaching hospital?
What comes to mind for that one?
Well, EDU is not allowed to be in an ORG situation. You have to make sure that as people move on from the school and then move into the actual hospital environment, that there are enough licenses and they're not using .edu software.
Fair. And to your point, the business processes may be different, right?
And their EDU software may work a little different in the business as well. So there may be a learning curve, even though they already know.
Well, I know around that, you've got to, at the front, you've got to make those distinctions between what's going to be supported, from the educational side and what's going to be supported, let's say, through the public service side of, especially a community hospital. And yeah, that is something definitely to consider, and to sort of like keep within different frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
The impact license usage, as you're already,
Yeah, some of those complexities of how they come into play. And you also, the other part is when it comes to this is where the data is stored. It may not be able to be stored in the same database.
Yeah, there'll be some limitations around that and security measures to consider.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you're going to have a little bit of this within your multiple business units as well, right? So we just give this example for a teaching hospital, but we could easily say something's going to be like this on the ambulatory side, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there's an entire, if they have ambulances dispatched throughout with all the computer systems and their technology, you're going to have something very similar here as far as differences. Now, again, we're not talking about EDO versus org. I'm not even going there, right? Yeah. But you're different departments, right? You may have to separate that out, how you put that in place. In each environment, it's not a cookie cutter. This is going to be a one-by-one type of integration. It's like, Bill, but you just overwhelmed me. You were overwhelmed when you walked in the door. Overwhelmed is self-influence. That's what we do ourselves. I've learned that from my own coaches. But what you're doing here is help identify to say, okay, this is a big project, a really big project, right? you help it articulate and say, okay, let's look at the bigger picture. And they're going to say, well, we want all this done. It's like, that's great. Hire another 20 team members. We'll make it happen immediately. Happen within 3 months. That's great. Actually, it's not 3 months, within the next 6 to 12 months. Let's be able to help articulate your messaging. Again, that's back to communication, right? How you communicate is going to be extremely critical. And it's not meant for I'll say the unseasoned individual in this case. Again, I'm not trying to promote anyone from a level of experience. Everyone has different level of communication, how they dialogue, but being able to make sure you have be able to connect those dots is extremely critical here. Okay, so we talk about facility tours, we talk about device tours, we talk about different equipment, we talk about labs, what about just IT? So let's go back to IT, right? Because IT, when it comes to the technology side, what about us is the best way to put it, right? Because usually we're the redheaded stepchild in hospitals. We're the last ones thinking about low budget because it's just not our part. We can talk about that a little bit on Monday, right? But what about IT? And say, okay, we're already overwhelmed, understaffed. How are we dealing with our own stuff? We're talking about out there, that's great, but how do we deal with our own? Because there's one thing on technology. How do we deal with technology equipment inside just the core group? I think that's also important. We talk about databases, systems, networks. What comes to mind for there?
Mm-hmm. It comes back to that alignment activity and ensuring that you're meeting those needs that are identified. IT's role is not, to inflate IT. IT's role is to support those business objectives, and that's why often it's undervalued and maybe underfunded is the word I'm looking for too. And so
Sure.
I think that some correction on its function, its maturity, and the value being returned from those services is warranted.
It may be hard for them to have a centralized catalog.
Oh, well, they should.
I know they should.
Yes.
They may not think that way because of all the different type of departments.
True. You've got that part.
Because everything kind of comes down to cost center, right? In most organizations, that's been my observation as well, especially within government. Yeah. And trying to bring it all together, make it uniform, and then make it optimized. Those are kind of the stages that you go through when you do it right.
That's perfect. And the whole idea is, keep in mind, IT, because we usually don't hear that within corporate world. Usually IT has a supporting arm of some sort, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be able to make that happen. And hospitals, we're the last ones that think we thought of as far as in IT. So if there's a way you can help your further brethren, that just helps overall dialogue. As we come up to the top of the hour, and I'm really glad that we're talking about this. There's one last part I want to bring up, and it has to do with BYOD. Mm-hmm. Specifically BYOD from a patient perspective. We did everything else, the network, et cetera, BYOD. And this can be as complex or as easy as you want it to be, right? But that's also something, what comes to mind with BYOD? Because I'll give you my scenario. I remember, and everyone's done it. They go inside the hospital, they see there's a free network, they're connecting to it, and they're talking, see their emails, right? Sometimes that's happened. Especially as a patient, you get access to that. That's part of what you get paid for. But what comes to mind is a risk there, Rob?
Oh, there's a couple of things there, and you better have your ducks in a row from like an InfoSec perspective as well, and a DataSec perspective, because you'll have a hosting network that will be used to support whatever the needs are of the patients and just people, guests of the hospital, right? It should be minimized to that level that's necessary to give them the functionality that they want, and separate. It should be absolutely positively separate from any other system within the hospital, so that it can be governed, it can be shut off if necessary, if there's an intrusion. And so, yeah, that's like top of mind, especially with incidents over the last like 10 years. especially with hospitals and how they've been attacked.
Yeah.
You know, but there are information security experts that could speak way better to that than I can. I'm only just familiar with it because of incidents I'm aware of, and from an IT asset management perspective, where I've been able to support in those efforts, you know, and to make it so that it's easy, they see everything, they can track the stuff and isolate that traffic.
Because they can actually slow down an important area that needs the bandwidth if it's not isolated
Yeah, that's why it needs to be on its own.
on its own. Yep, absolutely.
No, those are great points. It's also being able to say that there's also disclaimers typically put in place in these type of environments to say, if you're connected to our network, if there's anything that happens to that device, it's up to that end user to address, right? If they don't have the correct security software on their own device, whether it's a mobile phone, tablet, computer, whatever it is, that's up to them. And that's the legal aspects. Keep in mind, that's also things that we need to make sure you may or may not be involved with that, depending upon how large or small the hospital is.
One of the other things I'm thinking of is you want to be very careful with your electronic devices not crossing over their data cables. Being a structured cableless person, if you don't put the cables correctly, you can get crosstalk between communication devices.
Well, if you do, there's a cable that's probably not up to proper specifications in that environment.
And even your electronics, if you put your electronic cable and your data cable parallel, that's really get interference. If you don't know how to do it 90 degrees, where you won't get as much interference. So that's not a standard for most people to understand either.
Well,
But it is good to be aware of that. Absolutely.
I'm aware of that from an engineering standpoint. That was
Yeah.
between the military and like my first government job, supporting science and engineering and establishing that monitoring network. Oh yeah, I've run into that.
Time and time again.
Yep.
Time and time again. And as we're wrapping up here, this is also being able to say what we're looking at here is from a stabilization. What comes to our mind for this hospital, right? Because we have as a multi-hospital network, has multiple facilities and clinics throughout the entire area in the region. Is being able to say, okay, how can we deal with the cybersecurity? How do we deal with the cybersecurity and asset management? Because there's a complete modernization being promoted by the CIO. And from that, being able to say, okay, what do we need to look at? The whole today was the stabilization exercise. What's going to help us to determine kind of those quick wins? Which I say stabilization right now, right? What's a better estimate to say here's what's good enough, so we're able to move forward with the 30, 60, 90 degree plan. 39 degree, 90 day plan. Degrees are up to you. What other impacts you have from different areas? That's also important. And that's what we've been talking about for the last hour, is being able to say, how do you look at this? Who's involved? It can be audits, stakeholders, different departments, different clinician, administrators, lots of different technology, right? The processes are all across the board, because keep in mind, even we didn't talk about it, but even with the stabilization, our support personnel, they're going to be different for inside the clinics than they are inside IT, than they are on the floor. I'd say the hospital when I mean floor, right? And you've got to have multiple different types of conversations, because on some people it's like, oh, it's going to be easy. Well, actually, hospitals are not. Asset management's already not hard, not easy, and it's like this just further makes it more complex. So as we wrap up, let's talk about any final thoughts here, Deanna. Let's start with you. Any final thoughts as we do a wrap up, and then we'll go to Ralph.
Basically, we have to be very careful. We can't take them too far away from what they know, but we still have to get them to where they need to go.
Yeah, my thoughts are once you've identified those areas and those weaknesses, like we're doing here, is we're kind of moving to that next step to help us to formulate that 30, 60, 90 and beyond plan. And I think that it's critically important, like I said, to get all the stakeholders identified in the room and communicated with up front, because that's going to help the whole group work together. And then this is not a completely uncommon scenario, especially within healthcare environments these days. More of this stuff is ending up in the news when they don't do it right, and where reputation becomes, a problematic issue for institutions that are struggling with this, And for those that do it right, or eventually get it right, smooth sailing, non-interruptive, continuous operations, patients are helped, and the environment's improved.
It is also about team collaboration too.
Okay.
So you've got to have team collaboration, because they're saying, oh, well, if you don't get it right, it's your head on the chopping block. It's like, well, if it's my head, your head's coming with it, right? It's it'd be a little blunt, right? It's being able to say, okay, how can we work this together? And that's the other part with the stabilization, is like, we're working on this together because this is a collective effort to figure out what the next step is. So you have a large beast, and maybe determine, okay, this modernization, there's only you're only going to do the clinics initially, or the hospitals initially, or a specific hospital floor, or maybe the educational part of the hospital is going to be first. Don't know. There's all sorts of different scenarios, but this is also where it helps determine for the preparing for your next discussion, which we're going to talk about on Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern, is what's the 30, 60, 90-day plan,
Okay.
right? It helps grease the skids to say the wheels are going. Now we need to figure out collaboratively how are we going to make it work, right? And making it happen. So thank you for contributing. Thanks for all your contributions. Thanks, Deanna. Thanks, Rob. It's been awesome to have you here as always. And and appreciate all the contributions here on the chat, et cetera. So being able to have that dialogue, help make that happen. And I'll look forward to seeing everyone on Friday. So see you then. Thanks, guys.
See you Friday. Bye all.
Friday.